back, we're live. We're here on a given Monday morning with Gauri Khandekar. She's with Global Relations Forum. She joins us by Skype from Belgium, from Brussels. Welcome again to the show, Gauri.
Thank you, Jay.
It's a kind of a special benefit that we have you to talk to because, I guess Europe gets more and more important in its own way, but now, this week, Europe is in a great tragedy. And I'm so happy that you can report to us. We have it on the ground from Brussels, so tell us what happened in Paris from the vantage of someone who is in Europe.
Well, as most of the people know by now, there have been some coordinated attacks in Paris outside a football stadium, some restaurants, and a rock concert, actually inside the rock concert as well. And this really goes 10 months after the Charlie Hebdo attacks, but this time the scale of tragedy was much bigger. So you had almost 130 people killed and more hundreds injured, and I think 90 of them are still critically wounded. And so this just goes to enhance or just dramatize the tragedy that Europe is facing in that sense, in the term of the growth of radicalization and Islamist extremism and the terrorist attacks that have been going on for the past many years.
Well, as you know, this is the certainly France's 9/11 for sure. Although I thought last January that it was Charlie Hebdo. This is a big one, and so the first question is, this is a very sophisticated attack. I read that there was 6 locations involved, 6 teams of terrorists, all operating in a coordinated fashion, and furthermore, using high tech, using cell phones that allowed for encrypted messages. So the great technology of the West has been used in an attack on the West. Very interesting, it's sort of commentary on our times. And they essentially got away with it because they were willing to give their lives over it, especially in the movie theater. It was particularly brutal, shooting people who were down, shooting people who were wounded. And I guess I would ask you, who did this? What kind of individual people? Do we know them? Where can we meet somebody like this?
Jay, before I answer your question about the who, let me just tell you that this is a bang replay of what happened in Mumbai in 2008. It was exactly the same fashion. Handful of terrorists, around 10 in Mumbai and then 8 here, going out on a mass shooting spree basically. Even with the Paris terrorists, their main weapons were AK-47s, hand grenades, and then, but the difference was there were also suicide bombers, which is, I think, one of the first in Europe to have this kind of suicide vest attack. But in Mumbai, that was missing. And you had almost more than 230 deaths in Bombay, and it's the exact same thing that happened. Terrorists going out on a shooting spree in normal locations, restaurants, cinema halls. In Bombay, there was also an attack on the Jewish a religious center,
yes,
and 5-star restaurants, and also the railway station where you had really poor people who sleep there on the ground, and they just brutally aimed at them. And it's the same thing here, yes. I mean, people who went to the Bataclan Theatre or to the rock concert where you had mainly young people, students, and they shot at them indiscriminately. And these people, well, we know some of the identities. Most of them are homegrown, in that sense, radicalized European nationals, Belgian, some of them. And I think 2 of them are Syrian nationals who've come across to Europe as refugees via the Greek island of Leros.
So they weren't migrants from Syria. They were European citizens, EU citizens, no?
Well, two of them are suspected to be Syrians.
Okay.
But most of them in the entire team have been mainly Belgian nationals. Some of them, I think a couple of them were French, but the others were Belgian and from an area which is around 4 kilometers from my home here.
Yeah. Well, so what kind of individual? I mean, can we take at least the European citizens and look at them as a profile? I imagine that they grew up in Europe, went to European schools, lived in the European economy. Can you profile them a little?
Jay, I think that what happens here is in Europe is that integration has been quite a bit of a problem. So even those that are second generation, like these terrorists, some of them, especially the main person who's missing, Abdus Salam Salah, he's a Belgian national. And they are really born and brought up in the heart of Europe, and literally in the capital of Europe, in Brussels. I don't know about their schooling because, as I said, sometimes integration has been a issue here, and the second generation migrants have complained, like in France. If you remember the French riots, the Beaulieu riots, that they don't get access to good education or jobs. And so they find themselves mainly attracted to mosques and those circles where they are getting access to people who are not the right people, who are radicalizing them. They don't see themselves as part of the European society.
Yes.
They don't identify themselves with European values, the culture. So you have really a divide which is growing and which is among those few individuals, yes. And there are people who are using this cultural divide, let's say, and pushing them to the edge where they get radicalized.
I remember they were attacking the theater, for example, because they they thought it was against their values, that it was Western values, and they opposed what was going on inside of it, entertainment. It was American music in there, as you recall, right? So they were not certainly not sympathetic with whatever was going on in that theater that was offensive to them. And that's one of the reasons they chose that as a target. But what strikes me, and I wonder if you could talk about it, is that you have to be a special kind of person to, one, go out and kill on a rampage. And then you have to be a special kind of person who's willing to be killed for it, or who, blows himself or herself up at the moment of truth. And what does it take to do that? Are there leaders that are suggesting that is the appropriate course of conduct? Are those leaders in Europe? Are they preaching, for example, to these kids? All these kids were 20 or less. Are they preaching to these kids to have them conduct themselves that way?
Jay, let me just say that one of the suicide bombers, Ibrahim Abdeslam, he was a typical youngster in a way who loved to party. He even owned a pub in Brussels, which was then shut down, of course, by the police for drug use. But he was, you could say a typical kind of second generation immigrant that you would, could stereotype in a way, who tried to look cool with his, black, mainly black clothing, and, tried to fit into that image in a way. But he loved to party, and that's what most of the news that we're reading here in Brussels says, and he ran a pub as well. So it's not that these people don't see the culture part of it as different from from their value systems in a way, because they enjoy it as well, But radicalization, and I've worked a bit on it for some years now on counterterrorism, is that it's a lot of brainwashing that goes into it, and continuous brainwashing, and it seeks to give youth that have other issues in terms of family issues or unemployment, or in the house when they talk about the cultural differences, or how or the talk in their home countries, and they seek to build on these issues, on this gap, to then propose to them a purpose. And this is how radicalization works. So they propose to them a purpose in life, which is basically upholding a religion, and attaining jihad, and then martyrdom, which would then lead to them going to heaven and getting, and this is not a joke, actually getting virgins.
72, as I recall.
Yes, 72 virgins.
Yeah,
That's right. And there are young people who believe this, And the fact that they really think that if they kill somebody, they can go to heaven is, frankly, it just shows you the depth of how much a person can be brainwashed, no?
Yeah, it is. So it is brainwashing, and the brainwashing, presumably for a lot of these kids, is taking place in Europe. And so I know that Europe is into freedom of speech, just as the U.S. is, and most European countries, at least Western European countries, encourage freedom of speech. They do not try to, dampen speech that may seek violence. I guess what happens if you let that go is this. And I would also say that it seems to me, and I'd be interested in your thought about this, is that we have a dynamic going on. There's more of this. This is sort of a natural progression of these young kids who are violent and don't mind taking lives, don't mind going at it with relish, and then blowing themselves up. It seems to me that, you talk about Mumbai, you talk about Charlie Hebdo, there'll be others, there have been others, and it seems like the pace is picking up, and therefore the number of kids who are willing to take this chance, the number of kids is picking up. And I just wonder, your thoughts and the thoughts of the average European about that. It must be pretty frightening to think that over your shoulder there's somebody who would like to shoot you and then shoot you again.
Yes, it's quite frightening, Jay. I mean, even now myself, I've been quite afraid to just step out. This afternoon I had a meeting near the European Parliament, and I thought twice, which is so kind of incredible, because Europe has been known as an area of peace and security. The Kantian peace, and it seems to have just gone away in a matter of a decade or so.
Yeah.
Now, let me just tell you a bit about what Europe has done in that sense when you spoke about freedom of speech or counterterrorism. Excuse me. So after the Madrid and the London terrorist attacks, there's been a lot of development in terms of EU legislation and how the European Union gets together. So the European Union actually has quite an elaborate machinery in terms of terrorism. Not the same as a country would have, of course, but you have very often, not weekly, but maybe quite regularly, meetings of all 28 member state counter-terrorism units. So they all come and meet together. They have various projects that they've been looking at, for example, radicalization on the web. So there's a group of countries that have worked on this project where they mark down the website, they take it down, they study what this jihadist content is being posted, even in terms of manuals of making, bombs at home have been posted online. So they take these down actively. There's been also another program which has been headed by Spain on the training of imams, because before European countries imported imams from Saudi Arabia, and those have been mainly imams which preached radical Islam at times, even Wahhabism, which is the more radical version of it. And UK led another project which dealt with radicalization in prisons and how to combat that. So there's been a lot that European countries have been doing. Before the London bombings in 2007, you could speak anything in Hyde Park, in the UK basically. Karl Marx used to famously speak in Hyde Park about his sorry. And then they stopped that after the London bombings because you had all these radical Islamist preachers who went there and basically said, death to the West, Sharia for the UK, we need to kill all Western people, and they just stopped it. So radical speech leading to terrorism has been banned, you know.
Yeah.
So there is a series of measures that have been taken, but if you see the statistics of those traveling from Europe to Syria, European countries across the globe actually are quite high. And you'll be surprised to know that the highest, the top country in terms of per capita terrorist fighters going to Syria is Belgium.
Yeah. Oh, Belgium. I want to talk about Belgium. I want to talk about Molenbeek. Let's take a quick break, though, Gauri, and then we come back and talk about Molenbeek, and also like to distinguish between the migrant phenomenon and the terror phenomenon, which I'm sure is a relationship, but there's also some pretty profound distinctions. We'll be right back after this short break.
Hi, my name's Hillary Weinberg. I'm the host of The Whole Gamut on ThinkTech Hawaii. See us live every Tuesday at 1 p.m. or on our YouTube channel to hear us talk about world affairs from Hawaii and beyond. See you then.
Hi, I'm your host on ThinkTech Asia, Bill Sharp. I look forward to you joining us each Monday between 4 and 5 o'clock when we film right here in our studio in downtown Honolulu. The show, ThinkTech Asia, focuses on contemporary events in Asia, and by Asia we mean anything from Hawaii, south to Australia and New Zealand, west to Pakistan, and as far north as the Russian Far East. Clearly, this is one of the most economically dynamic centers of the world, and we bring you up to date on what's going on in a whole host of countries in this very vital region. We look forward to seeing you. Aloha.
Okay, we're back. We're live with Gauri Khandekar of Global Relations Forum, who joins us by Skype from Brussels. It's midnight in Brussels, and so we call the show Midnight in Brussels. And today we're talking about the tragedy of France. We're fortunate to have her with us to explain the European phenomenon and the European reaction to this tremendously tragic event. Not only tragic in the immediate of it, but in the long-range implications of it. So we were going to talk about Belgium. So they found some of the terrorists came from Belgium. What's that? We haven't heard that before. We thought Belgium was a nice, quiet place. After all, you live there.
Yes, I know. Even the European institutions are here, and what quieter organizations doing great than the European institution? No, so uncontroversial. But yes. And I was also surprised to know that Belgium has links to the Charlie Hebdo attacks, the Jewish Museum attacks. Remember that we spoke about the London bombings, the Madrid bombings, and even the Mumbai attacks of 2008. So they all had links to Belgium and Molenbeek, which is the suburb of Brussels. So in the capital of Europe, basically. And it's, as I mentioned, just 4 kilometers from my house, which is quite unnerving. But I'm hoping they don't do much violence at home. So
there was a piece on Hawaii Public Radio this morning, National Public Radio, about Molenbeek, and it talks about the the NATO headquarters and all those international organizations, one of whom would be yours in Brussels, and it talks about a bridge, the bridge to Molenbeek. And you cross this bridge, you're like in a different world. It's, I think it's a largely Muslim neighborhood. And of the Muslims, 50% of them are from Morocco, interestingly enough. And it's a very vital, active neighborhood with lots of, shopping and bazaar type activities. But the problem is that it's dangerous. And I was telling you in the break that I was there in 1994, and our hotel keeper in Brussels said, don't go over that bridge. It's a dangerous neighborhood. You may find, a vital commercial district, shopping and street activity, but in fact, it's dangerous, and particularly dangerous to women who cross that bridge. And this has been the case now. I mean, if you do the math, 1994 to now is more than 20 years. And I guess it's gotten worse. Do you ever walk around in Molenbeek?
To be very honest, yes, I've been to Molenbeek a few times because a good family friend of ours lives there. And it's a very quiet residential area, or it seems like that. You have huge buildings, how do they call it, condos in Hawaii. So you have condos there with, as you said, a lot of shopping malls and, the restaurants and stuff. So to me, it seemed quiet. Ever since I've come to Brussels, which has been now, I think, around 8 years, nobody spoke to me about Molenbeek being dangerous. And I'm being extremely honest, the two dangerous neighborhoods that I've known, the Midi area, which is like the main area next to the railway station, the Midi railway station. And I lived there for 3 years, and that was really dangerous. And of course, it's also a bit, immigrant, let's say, or second generation Moroccan feel, And then you have the Gare du Nord area, which is the North Station area. And there again is the same thing, and is the red light district as well. So these two areas have been, to me, over the past 7 years, pinpointed even by Belgians as the most dangerous areas, and never Molenbeek. So it comes as a shock to me, to be very honest. And I would not have suspected it to be so dangerous. But what I'm angry about now, Jay, is that if the authorities have known for so long, given the links to all these, Madrid 2003, London 2005 and 2007, all these terror attacks, why have they not taken action so far? Why have they not been monitoring it constantly? And why has Molenbeek still continued to be what is now known as the jihadist capital of Europe? So this is something that's really gotten to me today. And over the past few days.
Yeah, that was part of the National Public Radio story, how the people were mighty irritated with the fact that the authorities in Belgium let it fester. And you have a lot of people preaching violence in that neighborhood.
Yes.
It's become a center of violence, and government never did anything about it, even though everybody knew.
Yes, everybody knew. And again, now we have the French are bombing sites, ISIS sites in Syria, in Raqqa, the ISIS capital, and training sites. But my question is, why now? You knew about these sites, you know what they're doing. Why not bomb them before, This is where I think that maybe there's something deeper going beyond that. And if you can prevent these attacks before, why wouldn't you? And there's so many preventative steps that could have been taken at home, but also in Syria. So for me, it's really something incredible.
Yeah. Well, let's make the comparison or distinction between the migrant phenomenon that you and I have talked about so many times and the terrorism phenomenon. I hesitate to think that they're linked in any substantial way, but I think a lot of people in the world do think they're linked, and do think that along with the migrants, terrorists slip into Europe in order to do dirty deeds. So is there anything to that? I mean, what's the press been reporting in Europe, and what do people think?
Well, there's been two sides to that, let me say. First of all, I think the authorities have confirmed that 2 of the suicide bombers were terrorists from Syria with Syrian passports who have come through Greece. And I think that is something that would be inevitable, some of those terrorists just slipping in with those who want to escape those kind of people. So that is a possibility, of course. And But what I'm also seeing, Jay, and I think this is really commendable of what Europe is and what Europe stands for, is that everywhere in the media and people on the streets, uh, and excluding the little factions, of course, the far right faction, they've been saying that immigrant is not terrorists. That we're not supposed to mix these two. That they're the people escaping the people that are doing these things. So I think in that sense, there is a bit of maturity that has come, even despite the tragedy.
Yeah.
But of course, there are going to be a lot of politicians which are going to use these attacks to say that we told you so, and this is why we need to close Europe's borders. But I think the solution, honestly, is just a better monitoring of who comes in, what they've done, a bit of their history as well, because it is a security threat after all.
Yeah.
I mean, the answer doesn't lie in closing your doors, but in verifying who comes in.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the French immediately said they would close the borders, and I think there must be all kinds of conservative reaction all over Europe about that. It reminds me of 9/11, where I remember my brother called me here in Hawaii, tell me just turn on the television. It was very early in the morning, and he told me what was going on, and I told him the world will never be the same, and I suggest the same here. Let's take a short break, Gauri, and we'll come back in just 1 minute and talk some more about how the world has changed.
Hi, I'm Donna Blanchard. I'm the host of Center Stage here on ThinkTech Hawaii. Center Stage airs every Wednesday at 2 o'clock, and of course you can check out our archives on YouTube or on ThinkTech Hawaii anytime you like. Why should you do that? Because this is an arts show that I believe is making a difference in lives. We talk with artists of various ilk. We talk with painters and writers, playwrights, novelists, poets, sculptors, dancers, you name it, directors, actors, of course. And we don't only talk about what people do, but we talk about how they do it. And my favorite part of the conversation, we talk about why they do it. And it's really common on this show to hear people say, wow, I didn't think about it that way. And it's very common to hear people afterwards who have seen the show say the same thing. And I hear all the time that people are inspired by the conversations that we have. So why don't you join us and be inspired too? That's Center Stage on Wednesdays at 2 o'clock. We'll see you Center Stage.
Okay, it's Monday. I'm Jay Fidel. We're here on midnight in Brussels with Gauri Khandekar of Global Relations Forum, talking about the tragedy in France only a couple of days ago. So, like 9/11, this kind of stepped up terrorism really does change things. It changes the way people think. It creates terror. It creates fear. And it also creates a change in conduct by individuals, who are afraid, and by nations who want to protect those individuals.
Yes.
And clearly now we have, the blush of it from the French government. Hollande, how do you pronounce that in French? Hollande? Hollande, from Holland, as it were.
Yeah, Hollande.
Is closing the borders and doing an accelerated bombing in Syria with French warplanes. I'm not sure that either of those is going to be effective, but I mean, are people with him on that? I know they care, deeply about what happened, but are they with him on his reaction?
Yes, actually, Francois Hollande is being hailed as quite a leader at the moment. So he's apparently, as one of the new Guardian says, he's transitioned from a marshmallow, which is how he's been perceived apparently. So let me just tell the audience a bit about what is supposed to be in Europe in terms of borders. So in most of the Schengen countries, which are mainly in continental Europe, so the UK is not part of Schengen. So in continental Europe, you have border-free travel, meaning there are no borders anymore. And you can just drive from Brussels to Bulgaria, basically. And there will not be any security checks. There will not be any border posts anymore. This is just wiped out. You could stand with one leg on each border. And And after these terrorist attacks, there's been quite a bit of reversion to bringing back the borders in that sense. I mean, the immediate reaction has been to have police checking the borders. And that is quite understandable because you have the one terrorist that survived, Adeslam Salah. He drove the car from Paris to Brussels, and the French authorities actually stopped him there and then let him go because they didn't have enough information at that point. And now the manhunt is happening again. But at the moment, because France is in a state of emergency, and it will be for the next 3 months, it was announced today, these borders will be in place. And most of the European leaders have reiterated that they don't want a border, want the borders to come back in Europe, because this has been an achievement of the European Union. This is what the European Union stands for. It's one people, one nation, one organization, basically. And they want that to stay. They don't want the threat to impact them so much that they change their way of life. And I think this goes also into the changes that have come about in that sense, which are somewhat temporary. Most of these countries see them as temporary in the sense of increasing the police forces, increasing funding, defense spending, for instance, or participation in the attacks. The biggest geopolitical change I see in all of this has been the West cozying up to Russia at the moment, because Putin has come in high demand at the for now,
Yeah. Well, what about, now you have, and we've talked about it many times, the migrant phenomenon, and there were two sides to it. The one side that is liberal and wants to make a good home for the migrants and provide them all the things they need to resettle in Europe, and the other side that beats them up with baseball bats, says you have to get out of town. We don't want you here. We want it the way it was before, without migrants from the south. And this event last Friday is probably going to change that. Do you see any signs of change? Do you see any signs of a conservative reaction that would reject migrants out of hand?
Not on a personal basis. I mean, those people who've taken bats and basically attacked these migrants have been really in the limited minority of those opposed to migrants as a whole, on the whole spectrum. They've been very limited minority. There have been a lot more people coming out on the streets in support of migrants as well. So many pieces of news showing how people have volunteered to give food, water, shelter to the migrants. In Germany, you have people literally who invited these migrants to live with them in their houses while they were waiting for community homes. So I have to say Europe has been, I have to commend Europe, I must say that, it's done a great job in the migrant crisis, because you have many Asian countries that are doing far worse. Of course, tensions on the US-Mexican border as well. But Europe has been great. It's the Greeks in particular, I mean, they've gone through the worst of the financial crisis, the Italians as well, and they're literally going out and saving those migrants from the sea, bringing them back ashore to Europe, and sharing whatever little they have with them. So in that sense, it's been something quite extraordinary, and I don't think that people would jump to the extreme spectrum in terms of opposing all these migrants. You can see on most of the news channels that people are saying migrants is not equal to terrorism. Mm-hmm. But I do think that there will be an impact in terms of national policy. So when the country's leaders will discuss about migrant issues, I think that will become, there will be some change, of course, in migrant policies.
Yeah. What about the all of the trouble in the Middle East? ISIS has been, successful, and as one commentator put it, the very continuation of ISIS, that it is still in existence, that it still holds territory, is an example of its success. I mean, it's an outrageous organization, totally brutal. It flies in the face of all kinds of human values, and yet it still exists for reasons that we could discuss at length. But
Yes.
how is this going to affect ISIS in the Middle East? Of course, the French are right now bombing them more. There's a fair chance that the U.S. is or will step up its attack on ISIS. I don't know about the other Arab countries in the region. I don't know exactly what they're going to do. But I suspect that there'll be a lot of people wanting to do away with ISIS. Does this mean ultimately, Gauri, the end of ISIS? Could it mean the end of ISIS?
Well, I really hope so, but I honestly don't think so. Because, Jay, I've grown to thinking that there's something bigger behind it. I mean, I'm never one for conspiracy theories, but there seems to be a big industry behind this, the arms industries or whatever politics that's going on, yes?
Mm-hmm.
A destabilized Middle East is also in the interest of some nations, or, or the Shia-Sunni divide or whatever. And one of my biggest arguments is, I mean, Afghanistan had nothing in compared to US, a superpower, and its coalition members, yes?
Mm-hmm.
But still it took more than 10 years, and they didn't even win the war against, basically not even a third world nation, with no kind of military, no arms, and Al-Qaeda, which was not so sophisticated even, is not gone. So how can we expect ISIS to all of a sudden disappear? This is my basic argument, which kind of has a reality check on, expectation. I would love for ISIS to just disappear, of course, but realistically, I don't think that might happen.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
Because it could have.
some people have suggested that the way to get to ISIS is not to support them. And there are countries out there groups out there that are giving them money, that are giving them weapons, that are encouraging them in some way. And if those people who support them stop supporting them, then ISIS would probably lose out in the end. I guess I'm also interested in your view of how this will affect politics. You've spent time in this country and studied, and I'm sure that Europe shows you a lot of, Europe media shows you a lot about what's going on between the Democrats and Republicans. It's like a world issue. Everybody in every corner, of the far reaches of Tibet must get information about what's going on with the Democrats and Republicans. And my gut reaction is that this is going to affect the American elections, one way or the other. It's like we can't joke around about diplomacy. We can't joke around about our role as the world's policeman or somebody who has a moral stake in keeping the world safe. And that ultimately, I think, will come out of this as far as American politics is concerned. But what do you think about it? And what do you think it'll do for European politics?
Well, I hope it brings about some kind of pragmatic change. Anyways, but I've not been a huge fan of European foreign policy as much as you would think, especially European foreign policy in the Middle East. So you've had the same European countries, when you spoke about those giving arms and support, so many of the European countries provided arms to Syrian rebels that, were deeming themselves as rebels before. But then, how do you know that they are rebelling, Is this, or do you give arms to a political rebellion which is supposed to be peaceful? And how do you know that they're not mercenaries and would just change to ISIS, which is what happened, Most of the arms have gone to the ISIS factory, basically. And the same with Libya. Libya was such a big mistake, I think. And most Europeans agree now as well. But, there's so many who saw it before. So I do hope that this brings a pragmatic change. And the biggest pragmatic change would be for Europe to strengthen its own defenses internally, really work on the issue of radicalization, work on the issue of security at home, and find a solution to how such attacks can really be avoided. And if you know hotspots, then monitor them closer enough, It's just a few basic steps, just get the basics right, I think.
Yeah. Well, maybe the part of it is inherent in the American election, and that is pay attention. Pay attention to what's going on in the world. Don't be an isolationist. Don't ignore what's happening on the other side of the border. The same thing as in Belgium. Don't ignore what's going on in Molenbeek. You got to pay attention. If you pay attention, you'll do better. You may not, you may not win the game, but at least you'll put the odds more in your own favor. Don't you think? Isn't that what's going to happen now?
Very well said, Jay. I think that's exactly what's going to happen.
Well, as I was coming in and listening to that story on NPR, it was very profound. It was an English reporter reporting on a moment of silence, must be over the weekend. And so they all got together, hundreds, thousands of them in a public square, maybe the Place de la République. There were candles there, and they made a prayer for those who were killed. And then they had a moment of silence, and it was supposed to be 1 minute. It was supposed to be 1 minute. But it wasn't 1 minute. It went on for 6 minutes. Powerful stuff. How do the French people feel? Is that the best expression of how they feel? I mean, I think that would happen, has happened in the U.S. as well, where it's a very civilized, faithful reaction. It's the great humanity kind of reaction. Instead of being angry, we take 6 minutes of silence.
That is so profound. You know how else the French have been reacting? They've gone to those same pubs and cafes outside, sat outside the bistros and enjoyed life. I mean, that's what Paris does best, right?
Yeah.
They're known for their lifestyle, their culture, their love of wine, music, and love itself, love of love itself. And they've just done that, Yeah. And this is just to show as well that, the terrorists cannot impact their way of life. And John Oliver said, if that's what you're waging war against, then good luck to you, basically. Because I don't think French culture can go away just like that. Any threat will diminish it. And I've lived in France for 2 years, and I know how profoundly they value their culture, their lifestyle, their way of living, and nothing is going to change that, I think.
Yeah. Will this happen again?
Sorry?
Will this happen again?
There's a high security threat alert in all of Europe. I hope not, but France is under threat again. But even UK, I think David Cameron, UK Prime Minister, has said that they've just foiled around 7 attacks. So it's a possibility. UK has just recruited more than 2,000 spies. Now, just recently they announced they will recruit 2,000 spies, and Germany, I would imagine, would also be under quite a bit of threat.
Yeah.
So it's wait and watch, honestly. This morning, can I just add?
Yeah.
This morning there was a bomb scare across 2 streets from my house at the European Commission, basically. So...
Just have to change your way of thinking about it. That's all. Have to integrate it into the quality of life somehow.
I would never have thought so, but yeah.
Well, thank you, Gauri. Thank you. Gauri Khandekar of the Global Relations Forum joins us. It must be almost 1 o'clock in Brussels. Thank you so much for joining us. We talked about the tragedy in France, and we'll talk again in 2 weeks, right?
Yes.
Thank
Definitely.
you so much, Gauri.
Thank you, Jay. Thank you.
Aloha.